I want to bring in Mark McKinnon, former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain, who's probably very happy that he's not running campaigns like that anymore. He's also creator of The Circus. With me in studio, Julie Roginski, Democratic strategist, author of the Salty Politics newsletter on Substack. Okay, I'm not going to tell you which race to talk about, Julie. Yes. I am going to ask you if there's one you're going to be watching in particular that may give you the best sense of the mood in the country.
So it's my home state of New Jersey by far, because under normal circumstances, Jack Ciattarelli should win this governor's race. You have an unpopular incumbent Democratic governor who's been in power for 8 years. In the state of New Jersey, nobody has succeeded a governor of their own party since a two-term governor since 1961. So if this were normal times, you would say that Jack Ciattarelli is very well positioned. You heard those comments about people in his home county of Somerset County talking about affordability, that they can't afford
high
taxes, they can't afford to live in New Jersey anymore. Ciattarelli must win his home county, Somerset, to be able to win this election. That is a very swing county these days. It was not when he first ran for office. It was a Republican county. But the problem is that we don't live in usual times. We live in the times of Donald Trump. And how many people are going to do what you heard that young woman say in Virginia, which is, I am going to vote not because I know anything about this incumbent or this candidate, but I'm going to vote because I hate Donald Trump and I want to stick it to him. And you know, if that is the case...
You think that's the major factor in New Jersey?
I don't know if that's the major factor, but I think if Mikey Sherrill is going to win tonight, that is the reason she's going to win. If that is the case, you should get on Route 78, drive up to Bedminster, and give Donald Trump the biggest hug of his life, because she will have gotten elected in large part because of him.
All right, so Mark, how soon, once polls close, do you think we'll have an idea of the political headlines of the night, and what are you watching for?
Well, I think it could be earlier in Virginia and New Jersey than it will be in New York, and maybe a little later. Although I think the results will be overwhelming in New York. So, and it'll be
so you're not one of the people who thinks this race is closer than the polls that came out in the last week or so would suggest.
No, I don't. Not in New York. I agree with Julie, though. I think that the race to watch is New Jersey. That's the most interesting one. And as she noted, if history's any pattern, Ciattarelli should have a good shot. Just voters get tired of whoever's in power and blame them. There's really three things we're looking at tonight broadly from a sort of 50,000 point of view, which is, you know, what's the winning message? And what is clear is that in all these races, the main message is affordability. So the question is, who's addressing that most clearly and most compellingly for voters? Also, I think it's going to be, well, what does it say about the Democratic Party after tonight if, say, Mamdani wins in New York and Sherrill and Spanberger wins in Virginia? We have very different kind of Democrats then. So what does that say about the Democratic Party? And then finally, what does all this say about Donald Trump?
Yeah. Well, President Trump, Julie, has not actually been very active in these races. And of course, last week he was abroad. But last night he did two tele-rallies, right, in New Jersey and Virginia for the two governor's races. But he never even said the name of the Republican candidate in Virginia, nor has he endorsed Winsome Earl Sears. That said, is Trump still the main player here?
Well, he hasn't done it because he knows she's going to lose and he doesn't want to be affiliated, in his words, with a loser, right? That's just typical Donald Trump. He'll throw anybody under the bus in order to not be affiliated with a loser, and he understands which way the wind is blowing in Virginia. I assume if by some miracle of God she pulls this out, he'll take full credit for it anyway. But look, Donald Trump is not welcome at least in New Jersey. He may be welcome in parts of Virginia. He may even be welcome in some parts of New Jersey, but more broadly, he understands, or at least his people do, that he would do more harm than good if he were to show up and have Jack Ciattarelli throw his arms around him, which you would expect Ciattarelli to do, whether Ciattarelli wants it or not. What he has done is he did a teletown hall specifically with a very powerful cohort of Orthodox Jewish voters in Ocean County, New Jersey, which is the most Republican county in the state, or one of the biggest Republican county in the state, because he needs those voters to turn out for Ciattarelli. They've endorsed him. Again, they endorsed Governor Murphy 4 years ago. They flipped over to the Republican this time around. So he's trying to get out the vote among people who he needs to get the vote out for Ciattarelli. That's an important thing that he's doing. They voted for him overwhelmingly last year. But he also, I think, is at least shrewd enough to understand that if you were to show up in Somerset County, in Bedminster, and demand that Ciattarelli join him at a MAGA rally, that would just be, I think, just a final death knell for Ciattarelli to have to do. It would just be a bridge too far, because It's one thing to understand that Chitterelli has gotten very MAGA over the last several years, but it's a different thing to have that visual of him standing next to Donald Trump that Chitterelli has been trying very hard to avoid having to do.
Mark, let me ask you finally, the early indications, well, we know from early voting there have been some records broken. We're hearing from a number of polling places that they're very busy, particularly for an off-year election. How much of that is driven by Donald Trump?
A big factor. I mean, that's the thing that gets my attention more than anything. It's the early vote and early vote enthusiasm. That's you know, when people are mad, that's not a good sign for the incumbent party, and they're generally blaming who's in power. So that's not a good sign for Donald Trump. And you see the early numbers in New York. That's why I think it could really be a blowout, because, you know, it's sort of like, you know, what you saw in Arizona in 2015 when Donald Trump first went out. When you feel that kind of momentum and that kind of enthusiasm, that's signaling that something different's going on. So I think this is really a kind of a movement candidacy. And that's why I think you could see big numbers from Mamdani tonight.
Julie Roginski, thank you. Mark McKinnon, please stick around.